In the depths of winter, our team assembled in the small town of Kaltos, nestled between two great mountains. The air was crisp and cold, with a hint of wood smoke carried on the wind. We had all received a cryptic letter from Dr. Ilara Vex, a renowned scientist who had spent years studying the effects of isolation on the human mind. She claimed to have made a groundbreaking discovery in an abandoned research station deep within the frozen wilderness, one that could change our understanding of reality itself. We arrived at the station on a gray, overcast day, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. The building stood like a monolith, its walls covered in a thick layer of snow and ice. We bundled up in our warmest gear, shouldering packs loaded with supplies and equipment for the long journey ahead. As we trudged through the knee-deep snow, the silence was oppressive. The only sound was the crunch of boots on frozen crystals and the soft hum of our headlamps casting eerie shadows on the ground. We had expected excitement, but instead, a creeping sense of unease settled over us like a shroud. Finally, we arrived at the entrance to the station, a massive metal door with a sign that creaked in the wind. Dr. Vex's research station, authorized personnel only. We exchanged nervous glances before stepping inside, leaving the frozen wilderness behind. Little did we know, our journey into the unknown had only just begun. As we stepped inside, the air grew thick with an eerie silence. The darkness was absolute, like a living entity that swallowed all light and sound. Our headlamps cast flickering shadows on the walls as we moved deeper into the station. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unblinking eyes were trained on us from the depths of the darkness. The interior was a maze of narrow corridors and cramped rooms, lined with dusty equipment and rusting machinery. It was clear that Dr. Vex had been working here for years, but there was something off about it all. The air reeked of decay and neglect, like a body left to rot in the wilderness. We made our way to the central hub, where a large map of the station's layout hung on the wall. It was then that I saw it, a series of cryptic symbols etched into the corners of the map, pulsing with a faint, blue light. They seemed to shift and writhe like living things, sending a shiver down my spine. "What are these?" I asked, pointing to the symbols. Dr. Vex's team looked at me with an unnerving intensity, their faces pale and drawn. "That," one of them said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is the mark of the Obsidian Initiative." I felt a chill run down my spine as I gazed upon the symbols. What was this Obsidian Initiative? And what did it have to do with Dr. Vex's research? We spent the night in the central hub, huddled around the map and trying to make sense of the cryptic messages. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the creaking of old wooden beams and the soft hum of our headlamps. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded towards some unknown fate, that the station itself was alive and waiting for us. As I lay in my bunk, listening to the darkness outside, I couldn't help but wonder what terrors lay in store for us. And then, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it, a low, whispery voice speaking on an old recorder, its words barely audible over the wind. "Welcome," it said. "We've been waiting." I sat up with a start, my heart racing in the darkness. Who spoke, and what did they want from us? I sat up in bed, my heart racing, as the voice on the recorder spoke again. "We've been waiting for you." It was a low, raspy tone that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to listen more closely, but the recording ended abruptly, leaving me with an unsettling silence. I threw off my covers and got out of bed, determined to find the source of the voice. The team had set up our equipment in the central hub, a large room with a high ceiling and walls lined with old computers and machinery. As I approached the main console, I saw that Dr. Vex's research assistant, Sarah, was huddled over her laptop, her eyes fixed intently on the screen. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up at me, her expression pale and frightened. "I don't know," she said. But I think this recording just started playing again. The machine hummed to life, and the same low voice spoke once more. "You should not be here." This time it was louder, more urgent, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip like a vice. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. But I couldn't move. The recording continued to play, the voice speaking in a language I didn't understand. Suddenly, the machine beeped loudly, and the screen flickered to life with a message. "Project Erebus, authorized personnel only." I felt a jolt of fear as I realized that we had stumbled into something much bigger and much darker than we could have ever imagined. As the days passed, we began to experience strange and unsettling encounters. Equipment would go missing or turn up in odd places, and some of us started to feel like we were being watched all the time. I remember waking up one night to find Sarah sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear. "I saw something," she whispered. "It was standing just outside my door." I tried to reassure her it was just a dream, but deep down I wasn't so sure. One of our team members, Alex, started to act strangely. He would wander off on his own, claiming he needed to check the equipment or do some research, but we never saw him again for hours at a time. When he finally returned, he looked different. His eyes seemed darker, and his smile was twisted and sinister. "What's going on with you?" I asked, feeling a growing sense of unease. He just shrugged it off, saying he was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. We started to argue about what was happening, and tensions ran high. It was as if we were all trapped in some kind of psychological nightmare. One night, I woke up to find Emily, another team member, standing over me, her eyes black as coal. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered, her voice not her own. I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. She leaned down and touched my face with cold, clammy skin. I felt a jolt of electricity run through my body, and suddenly, everything went black. When I came to, Emily was standing over me, a look of concern etched on her face. "What happened?" I asked, my voice shaking. She told me she had found me curled up on the floor, unconscious. I stumbled out of bed, feeling disoriented and shaken. As I made my way to the kitchen to get some water, I noticed that the messages were getting more frequent. They were scrawled on walls, etched into metal surfaces, and even written in the snow outside. "We are not alone," one message read. "They are watching us." Another said, "The truth is hidden in plain sight." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that we were being played some kind of twisted game. The messages seemed to be leading us on a wild goose chase, but I couldn't help feeling drawn to them. They were like cryptic clues, hinting at something much bigger than ourselves. I spent the rest of the day poring over the messages, trying to decipher their meaning. Alex had gone missing again, and we were all on edge. Sarah found a hidden journal belonging to Dr. Vex, filled with strange symbols and equations. "This is some kind of code," she said, her eyes scanning the pages. "But I have no idea what it means." As the sun began to set, we gathered around the main console, our minds racing with questions. What was Project Erebus? Who were they? And what did they want from us? The recorder crackled to life once more, and the voice spoke in a low, menacing tone. "The truth is not for the faint of heart." The screen flickered, and a new message appeared. "Meet me at the old windmill on the outskirts of town at midnight." It was unsigned, but I knew it had to be from Dr. Vex. "We have to go," Sarah said, her voice firm. "This is getting too close to home." As the days turned into weeks, our isolation became a living, breathing entity. The walls seemed to close in on us, making it impossible to escape the feeling of being trapped. We had lost all sense of time, and the outside world was a distant memory. Our only connection to reality was through the recorder's ominous voice, which seemed to be watching over us with an unblinking gaze. One by one, we began to crack under the pressure. Alex disappeared for good, leaving behind only his journal and a cryptic message. I saw the truth. Emily became withdrawn, her eyes taking on a haunted look that made me wonder if she had seen something that I hadn't. Sarah tried to hold it together, but even she couldn't resist the creeping sense of paranoia. We started to turn on each other, our minds playing tricks on us. Was it really Dr. Vex's voice we heard in the recorder, or was it just our own twisted imagination? The messages became more frequent, more urgent, and more menacing. "They are coming for you," one message screamed. "You will never escape." I felt like I was living in a nightmare with no waking world to return to. And then, one fateful night, the lights went out. We were plunged into darkness, surrounded by an oppressive silence that made my skin crawl. The recorder's voice whispered through the darkness, "It's too late. You should have listened." Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and we saw that we weren't alone. A figure stood in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It was then that I realized we had finally reached the end of our journey, and the truth was more terrifying than we could have ever imagined. As the days passed, our grip on reality began to slip further and further away. We started to see things that weren't there, shadows moving in the corners of our eyes, whispers in the darkness, and ghostly apparitions flitting at the edges of our vision. Sarah became convinced that Dr. Vex was still with us, watching over us from beyond the grave. She would spend hours talking to him, asking for guidance and comfort. Emily started to act out, lashing out at her teammates in fits of rage. "They're not real," she screamed, pounding her fists on the table. "We're just pretending they are. We have to snap out of it." But we couldn't. The messages kept coming, each one more twisted and sinister than the last. "You will never escape," one said. "Your souls will be devoured." Another warned us that the others were coming for us, their presence marked by an unearthly cold. We started to turn on each other, accusing our teammates of being in cahoots with Dr. Vex's sinister plans. The recorder's voice seemed to grow louder and more menacing, echoing off the walls like a malevolent entity. "You are not who you think you are," it hissed. "Your memories are false. Your lives are a lie." I tried to hold on to my sanity, but it was slipping away from me like sand in the wind. The world around me had become a nightmare, and I knew that if I didn't find a way out soon, I would be consumed by it forever. As the clock struck midnight, the darkness outside seemed to press in on us from all sides. The recorder's voice fell silent, and an oppressive stillness descended over the room. Sarah stood up, her eyes blazing with determination. "We have to know the truth," she declared, her voice shaking with emotion. "What is Project Erebus? What have we been brought here for?" I felt a surge of fear as I realized that we were on the cusp of something momentous but also terrifying. The messages had stopped coming, and yet I knew that this was only the beginning. Emily took a step forward, her eyes fixed on Sarah. "I think I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think Dr. Vex created us as part of his experiment." Sarah's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment we just stared at each other. And then, in a flash of insight, it all clicked into place. The recorder's voice, the messages, the isolation, it was all a test to see if we could survive in a world that was not our own. "We're simulations," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "Our entire lives have been a simulation." I felt my mind reel as the implications sank in. We were not who we thought we were. Our memories, our experiences, everything was a fabrication. And yet, despite this revelation, I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something more to it. Something that Dr. Vex had left out of his twisted experiment. We knew we had to escape, but the door was locked and the windows refused to budge. We were trapped in this simulated world with no way out. Doctor Vex's voice echoed in our minds, taunting us with his cruel game. "You'll never leave," he sneered. "You'll stay here forever." But we refused to give up. Sarah pulled out her phone, but it was dead. Emily rummaged through the drawers, searching for anything that could help us. I frantically searched the room, desperate to find a way out. And then I saw it, a small panel on the wall, hidden behind a bookshelf. It was a button, and it looked like it hadn't been pressed in years. Without hesitation, I pushed it down. The room began to shake, and the walls started to rattle. We stumbled forward, unsure of what we were doing. But we knew we had to keep moving. The door burst open, and we sprinted out into the unknown. We ran through the corridors, our hearts pounding in our chests. We didn't know where we were going, but we knew we had to get away. And then suddenly we saw it, a glimmer of light in the distance. It was freedom. We burst through the door and found ourselves outside. The fresh air hit us like a slap in the face. We stumbled forward, gasping for breath. And then we looked up at the sky. It was real. It was actually real. We had done it. We had escaped. As we stood there, bathed in the warm glow of freedom, I couldn't shake off the feeling that we weren't alone. At first, it was just a tickle at the back of my neck, but as the seconds ticked by, it grew into a full-blown sense of unease. We looked around, but there was no one in sight. The streets were empty, the buildings seemed to loom over us like giants, and the sky above was a deep, foreboding gray. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew better. Something was watching us, watching all of us. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure, tall and imposing. It seemed to be made of shadows and darkness. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, its presence radiating an aura of malevolence. Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" she whispered. I shook my head, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here." We turned and ran, our feet pounding the pavement as we desperately sought to escape the unseen presence. But no matter how fast we ran, it seemed to keep pace with us, its darkness closing in around us like a shroud. I could feel its eyes on me, boring into my skin, making my blood run cold. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard the voice. The voice was like a slap in the face, jolting me out of my trance-like state. "You can't escape me," it said, its tone dripping with malice. I spun around, but there was no one there. The figure from earlier was nowhere to be seen, and yet I knew that voice all too well. It was Dr. Vex's voice, the one that had driven us mad in the first place. "You'll never break free," it continued, its words echoing in my mind like a mantra of despair. Sarah grabbed me by the arm, her grip like a vice. "We have to keep moving," she whispered urgently. We ran through the streets, our feet pounding the pavement in a desperate bid for escape. But no matter how fast we ran, I could feel Dr. Vex's presence closing in around us. It was like he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time, his voice echoing in my mind like a cruel joke. "You're mine," it said, its tone dripping with triumph. "Forever." I felt my grip on reality start to slip, my mind reeling with the implications of Dr. Vex's words. We were trapped, caught in a never-ending cycle of torment and despair. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Sarah stumbled and fell to the ground. I dropped to my knees beside her, my heart racing with fear. "Sarah," I whispered urgently. She didn't respond. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused, her body limp and lifeless. I screamed, my voice echoing through the streets as I desperately tried to revive her. But it was too late. The darkness closed in around us and everything went black. As I lay there beside Sarah's lifeless body, I felt a sense of numbness wash over me. The world around me was muffled and distant, like I was watching it from outside my own skin. I tried to move, to get up and keep searching for help, but my legs felt heavy and unresponsive. Dr. Vex's voice echoed in my mind, its tone dripping with malevolence. "You'll never be free," it whispered. I knew then that I was trapped, caught in a living nightmare from which there was no escape. The streets around me began to distort and twist, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my own fears and doubts. I saw Sarah's face, her eyes black as coal, her skin gray and decaying. She reached out a hand and touched my face, her fingers cold and clammy. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I tried to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. The world around me began to dissolve into chaos, like a painting smeared by a wet brush. Colors blended together, shapes shifted and twisted, and the air was filled with the sound of screams. I was drowning in a sea of terror, unable to escape the abyss that yawned open before me. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw it. The figure from earlier, tall and imposing, stood over us, its presence radiating an aura of unspeakable horror. It reached out a hand and touched my face, its fingers cold and wet. "Welcome home," it whispered, its voice like a sigh from the depths of hell.